Hi, I'm Taty Guedes. I'm a bachelor in translation studies, and I've been working as a translator and a reviewer for over 27 years now. I started in 1997. And today I'm going to talk a bit about what we translators do. I'm from Brazil, by the way, so that's why you might find my English a bit different or peculiar. It's the accent. So, if we look up the definition of translation, say in the Oxford or the Cambridge Dictionary, we're going to get something like the process of changing something that is written or spoken into another language. So that sounds pretty simple, right? But it's not that way, you know. We're not just taking something written or spoken and changing it. We are making sure that whatever was written or said means the same thing in a different language, that it carries out the same weight, the same objective in a different language. So we need to be aware, for example, of social, cultural, geographical aspects of the author, of the text, of the story that's being told. We need to be aware of when the story was written, because a story written in the same place at different times will carry different weights, will carry different political, social, cultural aspects, you know. And it's important to be aware of that so that we do not miss something implied, you know. So we're always suspicious, actually. Translators are always very suspicious of what we're looking at. So maybe you come across something in a text and you wonder if are they quoting Shakespeare maybe in backwards, in an opposite way? Are they making a play of words with a part of the Bible maybe? Are they quoting a classic here? Is this maybe Dostoevsky? I don't know. We have to always be suspicious. So we're always, all the time, doubting what we're reading. By the way, that's how it feels. You know, we read it and we think, is it just straightforward? Is it just a simple sentence, or is there more to it? Especially when we're dealing with literature, of course. But this also happens in non-fiction works. You know, a writer might be quoting a classic, they might be quoting a movie, they might be making a pun, a wordplay with a famous quote, with a famous saying. Are they subverting a famous saying? You know, we have to see these layers. We have to make sure that these layers reproduce in the target language, in the language we're translating to, because otherwise we're changing the nature, we're changing the tissue that creates that work, that makes that work be what it is. And then we have to think, how do we translate these? You know, if it's a famous saying, for example, that is being played on, how do we translate this? How do we make sure that this is working in the target language? Does it have the same weight? Is it as funny? Is it as I don't know, innovative, you know? So if the author creates something, we have to create something as well. So we always need to be suspicious of what we are reading. And more, we need to be careful of offensive terms, you know. If we're dealing with classics or texts, even that are not classics yet, written maybe in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, there were terms back then that were okay to use. And today they are totally not okay to use. So what do we replace this with the okay terms? But does that not make the character a different person? Was the term used in an offensive way, or was the term used because that's just how people spoke at the time? And then do we replace the term? Do we add a footnote maybe explaining, oh, back then this was okay, we're not being offensive here on purpose, we just want to know, you just want to explain that we're not being offensive here, it's the character who's being offensive, or that's how people talked back then. The character is actually a nice person, they're not being offensive, you know? So how do we deal with that? How do we not over-explain what's happening, but make sure that the same weights, the same layers are always there in the target text, in the final text, in the final subtitling, in the final whatever we are translating. So translators always end up with dozens of tabs open on their web browser. We always have dictionaries, so we have our Oxford or Cambridge or Webster, and then we have the synonym dictionaries. We have a thesaurus open as well. Normally we have Wikipedia, which is a starting point for a lot of research that we do. Bible.com, because there's a lot of Bible quotation in literature, in movies, hidden in places somewhere that unless you have that suspicious mode on, we miss on it. Google Images helps a lot because sometimes we just don't know what we're talking about, and then we Google it and we Google the definition and we don't know it, we don't understand it, and then we image it, and then we, oh yeah, I know what that means, I know what that is in my language, in my country. And then we get to the specifics, you know, and examples from just this week. I had a tab open for plants from New Zealand, and a tab open with parts of the saddle, horse saddle, because I was working at the same time on poetry by a New Zealand author and on a Western short story. So our Google, we say that our Google history is completely insane, and it might even look suspicious sometimes, because sometimes we have to Google parts of a gun, because I don't know what parts of a gun are called in Brazil, because that's not what I'm into, you know. Maybe a person in the shooting club will know, but I don't know. And then I have to Google common plant names, or what their equivalent are here for plants from the countryside of England or New Zealand, like I said, or animals of the Australian bush and things like that. So it's insane. And then sometimes we just walk around the house trying to think of a word, or we message friends, family, partners who are just minding their business. They might be at work, they might be driving, and we're going, what's the name of that thing that you put the time, and then once the time runs out, it hangs? Because we're all day, we're for hours looking for words in our minds, in dictionaries, and the simplest of words, they just disappear because we're so engrossed in the work we're doing. And then as soon as we're typing a message, we go, oh yeah, that's called a timer, oh yeah, that's called a whatever, you know. So all the time in our minds, we're processing words back and forth, and we're trying to remember what things are called, and we're trying to think if that word is okay, if that word really means what it should mean in the original as well. So we're all the time researching and looking for the right word, the right meaning, the right sentence, the thing that rings the best, that means the best. And we think that with all that effort, we get a lot of credit for our work, right? But unfortunately, it's not that way. In literature, for example, there's a big movement in the past few years for getting the translator name on the cover of the books they translated, and that's been happening. Not everywhere, not by all publishing houses, but it has been happening. In Brazil, we have some cases like that where the translator name goes on the cover of the book. So that's a good start. But some of us work not only with books. In my case, for example, I've been working as a technical translator for 27 years, and I work with technology, I work with user manual. So you have your digital camera, and that camera has a user manual that goes with it. Somebody translated that. Somebody went through all the buttons and commands and settings of that camera, and you buy your earphones, a mobile phone. On the mobile phone, you have all the UI, all the user interface. So you have your setting buttons, you have your volume, you have your screen color. All that was translated by somebody. It used to be somebody anyway. Now more and more nowadays we're seeing it being done by artificial intelligence, which has been fed with translations for a while now. But somebody translated that. Somebody went through all this effort, all this research, and some of us don't get credit. For example, on my technical work, I don't get credit for anything. And more than that, I can't even talk about it because I sign non-disclosure agreements. So maybe there's websites that use every day to purchase books or your groceries, or you use your word processor software, you use your, I don't know, and a translator made that available to several different languages, and their work is just not credited. It's just kind of magically I can choose which language I want to see my screen on. I want to see the subtitling in Portuguese, in Spanish, in Chinese, and sometimes we don't know who translated that. It's a company name. This also in subtitling, more and more we're seeing the person's name there actually, which is quite very good. But sometimes we're just the invisible elves doing the work and not getting any credit for it. So do you know when though people always think of the translators? When they see a mistake. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you've all watched an international movie or series, and maybe you know a bit of French because you took it in high school, maybe you know a bit of Spanish because of your family legacy, and then you're watching your movie, your series, and you spot a mistake on the subtitling and you go, translator screwed up. They screwed up here, they didn't understand it, that's not what it means. And that's the only time people think of the translators immediately, when they are seeing something in their language that comes from a different language. So maybe it's time we start thinking of the translators when we take maybe a Korean book and we read it in our language, be it Portuguese, Spanish, English, and instead of thinking only, of course, the writer is to take all the credit for that piece of work, for that artwork, but whatever emotion that is causing on you, maybe it's time to think, wow, the translator did a really good job here as well, And I thought that maybe you might have some questions. I anticipated questions that people normally ask when I say that I'm a translator. And one of them tends to be, does it pay well? And it's always a tough question because no, but maybe yes. Of course, when you start working, you're gonna start entry level. You will start at entry level any work that you do. So you're gonna have to work a lot to create a name for yourself, create a reputation, have a portfolio that entices other clients to work with you, and then work starts flowing, your rates start getting better, and it's a job that does pay well in the long term. Yes, it's possible to make a good living of being a translator, but we do put on the hours. It's not a career where you are gonna eventually be able to work 2 hours a day and be so well paid that that's all you have to work. No, it's not. You can make a good living of it, but you're gonna have to put on the hours all the time, you know. The other question I thought of was then how do you become a translator? And there are several things here. First, you have to know a second language very, very well. You have to know a second language to the point where you see those layers, you see the wordplay, you see the subversion of the language that some authors do, and you have to be able to understand a second language really, really well. So you have to study it a lot. And you have to know your mother tongue, your native tongue, even more than that. You have to be a master of your mother tongue. You have to be able to recreate whatever the writer is saying, the original, into your native tongue, your native language, in a way that it doesn't cause any strangeness, that it doesn't feel like this was taken apart and put back together again. That can't be that. So you have to be able to navigate from one language to the other and in a seamless way. So it takes a lot of studying. There are degrees in translation in universities. There are postgrad programs as well. You can do a master's or a PhD in translation. There are just courses as well, online diplomas kind of things that you can do, or 3-4 month courses that give you the basics of translation. It can be literary, games translation, subtitling, whatever. There's all of those nowadays, you know. Back in my day, we didn't have that. There was one university in Brazil that had a translation program, so that's where I graduated from. But nowadays, you have so many options, you know. And then once you understand what translation is, you need to start building a portfolio to put in your CV. So normally what we do is we do pro bono or voluntary work, because it's very hard to get your first opportunity without having opportunity, you know, that's kind of thing, you know. We see jokes and memes about that all the time, you know. They ask me for years of experience, but how do I get years of experience if I don't get my first experience? It's the same everywhere, and it's the same with translation. But I can do volunteer and pro bono work. There are NGOs that are always looking for volunteers for translation. They're a good way to start. And you can also maybe translate for your friend. Maybe you have a friend who's a game developer and they created this really cool little game, and then you can translate it for them. Or maybe your friend wrote a short story they want to submit for a magazine that is abroad. That's what I do. I do that a lot. I translate for my friends who want to get published abroad in publications in several different countries, you know. So maybe that's something you can do as well. You're gonna have to look for ways of getting a little portfolio there. For literature, I think it's easier in a way, because you can maybe go to a public domain, get a public domain book, a book that is no more under copyright law, because the author has passed away for a long time. It varies country by country. In Brazil, it's 70 years, but in your country it might be different, so you have to research. But then maybe you take this book by this public domain, you take this public domain book and then you translate it and self-publish it, or try to sell your translation to a publishing house who works with classics or things like that, you know. You have to find a way of getting something in your portfolio. And you can volunteer even for those magazines, you know. There are some publications that match a writer from a country to the local language, and then you can translate. Maybe a writer from Germany wants to submit to your country, so I translate from German, so I'll do this work for free to get me published into this magazine as a translator, and that goes into my portfolio. You can do things like that. Once you have an okay portfolio, you start looking after agencies. If you want to do technical translation, you're going to go to an agency and you're going to go through a test and then maybe get your first job. And subtitling is the same. You're going to go to an agency and try to get your first job. It's not easy. You have to, these people get hundreds of CVs every day, so you have to be able to get lucky as well that your CV will be seen there in the middle of the pile, the digital pile of CVs. And then once your CV gets seen, then you have to get lucky enough that they're in need of what you have to offer, and they'll give you a test or even a first job opportunity or something like that. I wish I could say it was easy and simple to get in the business, but it takes a lot of work. It does take a lot of work. And another question I get a lot is about the language pairs, what language to translate from to. So normally we learn a second language and we translate from that language to the language we speak since we were children, our native language or mother tongue. But we can do the opposite as well. For example, I translate from Portuguese to English because I've had enough living and existing in the English language that I can do that. I lived abroad for 11 years and I've been studying English for 37 years or something like that. So I have enough experience and time living in the English language that I can translate to it. So it depends on the demand of the time. So maybe a short story you can translate to a language that is not your native tongue, or even maybe a book, or even maybe a technical document or a marketing material you can translate to a different language. Literature, to heavy literature, it's harder for agencies, for publishing houses to want to do that because they normally will go for a native speaker to translate. So normally that's how it happens, foreign language to your own language, and that's it. You can do from more than one language. I translate from English and Spanish into Brazilian Portuguese. So maybe you have 2 or 3 languages that you studied all your life. Maybe you have a knack for languages, and then you can translate from different languages to your own native tongue. So and of course, more what they are called, it's not me who are saying this, that's what they're called in the business, the exotic languages they're called. So there are languages that there are less people available in the translation world to translate from. So maybe if you know Japanese, maybe Chinese, Hindi language or something like these, they're called exotic languages because there's less people who just learn them. Normally what we do in Brazil, we learn English and Spanish. In the US, maybe you learn Spanish and French, and things like that. So the language that less people study, that there are more native speakers than second language speakers of that language, they're called exotic language. So those languages have more demand for work because less people work on them and they pay better and there are more opportunities in them. So if you're thinking of starting to learn a language now, maybe you can think of one of these exotic languages that attract you, and there will be more opportunities to work on a pair like that, on an exotic language to your own language, than just say Spanish English, for example, or English Portuguese, things like that. So I think this covers what I had planned to talk about today. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. You can just comment on the video or you can get in touch with me and I'll do my best to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you for watching this little talk about translation, and I hope we can engage again at a different time. Thank you.